to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
This time, we're welcoming Michelle Gadsden-Williams, who has a long career in diversity and inclusion. She's been a chief diversity officer in global companies in both Europe and North America. Her roles have been mostly global, and one of the reasons we know her and wanted to invite her is because she crossed paths in the nicest possible way with Antoine when they were both working at Novartis a few years back. So Michelle, welcome to Disrupt Your Career. It's a real honor to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to talk to you today about whatever comes up, but we've got a lot of different things to explore. So I'd like to do one question that comes in a sort of chronological way, which is that you started out studying communications and marketing. And indeed, like me, you began your career in fashion and retail with no obvious or particular focus on talent or diversity. So I'm wondering what it was that first attracted you to the field of diversity.
So let's start with why I chose the majors that I chose in university. So I was an intern working for a major, I wouldn't even say a retailer, product development organization that sold to retailers. I was an intern with them for many years. I also worked at a major department store called, back then it was Bamberger's, now it's called Macy's. That was my part-time job while I was in university. And so at the time when I graduated, there weren't many positions open because the market was such that it wasn't, quite as robust. And there weren't many jobs available. So my part-time job then became my full-time job. And so that's how I ended up in retail. But my intention was to pursue a career in law. And communication was going to help me to just upskill my negotiation skills, my articulation, presentation, the art of persuasion, all those kinds of things. And I enjoyed business. My father is a retired executive. Mm-hmm. And so marketing seemed like the right thing to do, the right place to start. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose the major that I chose. Now, once I graduated and I started working, I soon realized that marketing was not quite as gratifying for me professionally. I liked it. I didn't love it. And so I left one organization to work for another that allowed me to rotate to various functions within that company. So I moved from marketing to finance to procurement to advertising so I made my way around the organization. And my last and final stop was in human resources. Uh-huh. And my assignment was to create a best-in-class affirmative action strategy. Now I'm dating myself because that's what it was called back then. So I went out and about in the Northeastern Seaboard, spoke to top-tier companies at that time who were best in breed, from Texaco to PepsiCo, IBM, and a host of others. And I spoke to their leaders of diversity practice. And so after several months of doing my data collection, I came back, presented my findings to the CEO and the executive committee. And at the very end of my presentation, the president of the company said, "So do you want the job?" And I said, "Absolutely, yes." And the reason why I said yes was because of a couple of things. What this work represents to me is to help the talent within an organization realize their ambition, realize their potential, and realize what's possible. The second piece is to create and foster a culture that would be conducive for any individual, regardless of their background or, whatever their lived experience was, to help create a culture that's conducive for all, where everyone can thrive and realize their North Star. And then the third piece was interacting with the clients or key stakeholders on the outside, the marketplace. And so there aren't many roles in corporate America that does all three. And so I fell in love with the work because of that, and I've been doing it ever since. So it just so happened that I found my niche, I found my North Star very early on in my career.
That's a wonderful story. Thank you so much, Michelle. I love that. What a wonderful way to start a career. Of course, one of the things that it's probably worth saying is that most people don't start their career in quite such a felicitous way, do they? Many of us struggle to find the things we love. We often go through our careers flailing around, flipping from one thing that we don't much like to another thing that we don't much like, and have a lot less determination and a lot less consciousness, I guess, of what we like. And what I love about the beginning of your story is that you were aware, even when you were studying communication, even about, with a view to doing law, that you were talking even then about transferable skills, weren't you? You were already thinking in terms of competencies. I don't know whether that was natural or whether that was something that you'd been taught, but what a wonderful instinctual way to be going towards your North Star and the thing that was going to serve you and allow you to serve others.
Well, I think a lot of it, I have to give credit to my parents. My mother is an entrepreneur, my father's a retired executive, and my parents believed in what I would describe as unrelenting straight talk. And what that means is that every morning, I'm an identical twin, and I have a much younger sister who's 14 years younger. Every morning, my father would ask my sisters and I the same few questions. So girls, who are you? What do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And so, that was his way of nurturing our talents and teaching us to be expressive in terms of our thoughts and articulating exactly who we were at a very early age. And so I knew very early on that I had a perspective, that I had a point of view, and I knew that I wanted to be heard. And so I give a lot of the credit to my parents because, one of the things that my father said, even way back when, he says it to me now, even I'm over 50. He says, you're not here to occupy space. You're here to make a difference, and it's up to you to determine what that difference is. My mother, your mother and I gave you an education. We gave you all the tools. Now it's up to you to determine what that next step is for you. And so when you have that as a foundation, when you are taught to flex that muscle of thinking through, who are you? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? What do you want to do in the world, and what impact that you want to make? You start thinking about that as you start plotting and planning your career. So I give credit to my parents who really taught my sisters and I to think strategically about who we were and the kind of impact that we wanted to have at a very early age.
They sound like extraordinary people. I'm wondering what advice you'd give to a college student who maybe isn't endowed with quite such sage advisors, a college student who's wondering what to do and is about to enter the workforce.
I would say, take the time to do your own self-assessment. Get a sense of who you are. What are you good at? What are you not so good at? What are the areas of development? What brings you joy? What is it that you want out of your career? And so if you can ask yourself those questions, and it doesn't have to be right away. It doesn't have to be in your 20s or 30s. There's no real timeline around it. But I'd say spend the time in understanding exactly who you are. And what brings you joy and what is going to give you the most satisfaction in terms of your career, because a lot of us, we're going to be working a long time. And to me, there's nothing worse than being in a role that you don't like, or in a job that you don't like, or that you don't have real passion for, and to go into that place of employment every single day and you have no real purpose. There's no intentionality around what you're doing. To me, there's nothing worse than that. So I'd say spend the time in understanding exactly who you are and dream big, understanding what you want. It's really interesting. I worked for a CEO who used to say that if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough.
Oh, yeah.
And I truly believe that. So, be courageous, think big, think bigger than yourself. This work, this life, your contribution in it, it's not all about you. It's about what are you going to do to help others along the way. So I'd say think about your career in those terms.
Very much so. Thank you. I think that's wonderful. And I certainly share that view that not having scary dreams is to accept less than the best for the world and ourselves. Definitely. Just thinking a little further into careers, you've been mentored and sponsored by people that you've found incredibly valuable throughout your career. What would you tell us in order to help people find the right sort of mentors and sponsors and building relationships as they go?
Wow. Building, maintaining, and sustaining relationships is key to anyone's career. But this notion of mentorship and sponsorship, pivotal to one's success.
Yeah.
And I would have to admit that I personally have benefited from the mentors and sponsors and those relationships that I've been able to build and maintain over the 30 plus years I've been working in corporate America. And there is a difference between the two. I liken to this mentor as I enjoy sports, so I'm going to give a little bit of a sports analogy.
Sure.
As your coach, that person that's going to help you to flex those muscles and help you to realize, where you need to focus your attention in order to get better, and holding up the proverbial mirror and allowing you to see those deficiencies and helping you to build core skills and competencies and all those things. But a sponsor, however, that's your sports agent. That is the person that is at the table where the conversations around your development, stretch assignments, promotions, those are the behind the closed door conversations that happens. And so in my opinion, and also research has proven this, that women and or people of color are typically over mentored and under sponsored. We have everyone telling us how to navigate the landscape of an organization, all those wonderful things to help you be successful. But what we're looking for, what we need, are individuals who are willing to put their own personal and professional collateral on the table to take a chance on us and advocate for us in those rooms where those discussions are being made. And so critically important, and they're tried and true anchors for me. It's really interesting. I had a mentor who used to say, if you're the smartest person in the room, find a new room. And I found several rooms. And so my mentors, from Alex Gorski, who is the chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, to Thomas Ebeling, who used to be the CEO of Novartis Pharma. The list goes on and on of people who actually didn't even look like me. And that's the other thing. Your mentors don't necessarily have to be the same gender or the same nationality or the same whatever. I typically look for people who are vastly different than me, because I believe in reverse mentoring. There's something that can be learned, and it goes both ways.
Oh, it's so good.
As a woman, as a person of color, there's something to be shared about my lived experience in corporate America, or just in daily life, about how I experience the world, and sharing that with a person who, a Caucasian male who is, German, or whatever the case is. There is a lot to be shared and a lot of knowledge to be gained in terms of, we are all not the same, and we all don't have the same experiences in life, and especially in the workplace. So having that knowledge and having that, candid, vulnerable conversation about that, you're able to foster and cultivate relationships that will take you far and that will last a lifetime, I would say. So very, very important.
Thank you. I love both the image of the sports agent. That's a new one for me. I think that's wonderful. And also it's so important to remember that mentoring and such like relationships go in both directions. And of course, that is one of the facets of true diversity and true inclusion, isn't it? Recognizing that everybody's experience brings a different perspective, a different facet, a different part and way of seeing life and seeing work.
Absolutely, because it's not about your career success is not about who knows you. It's about what are they willing to say about you, right?
Absolutely.
So it's just critically important to maintain these relationships.
It really is. Thank you. That's great insight. Now I'm thinking now a little bit more specifically about the discipline, if you will, of diversity and inclusion. And one of the things I'm really curious to understand is that you've worked for American companies in the US at both regional and global level. You've worked for European companies in Europe and in the US. You've kind of crossed and mixed all kinds of different geographies and cultures. And I'm wondering what differences you might have observed in either the corporate cultures involved in some of these mixes, and also in terms of talent management and the role that diversity and inclusion plays in companies.
I really haven't seen much difference. There's not much variance between an American, company versus, a company of a different origin. I really have not noticed much of a difference. The only difference that I appreciated was that there were a lot more nationalities represented. If they were not global, one of the things that I loved about working for Novartis was that working in Basel on that campus, beautiful campus of well over 10,000 people, there were over, and that this is a stat, I'm not sure how true this was, but I remember hearing that there were probably close to 90 nationalities represented.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of number. It's huge, isn't it? It's almost unimaginable.
You don't have that experience very often in your career. So I would say that was the biggest difference, is that you were exposed to individuals from a myriad of different countries, continents, who spoke multiple languages. So I'd say that was the biggest difference, is that you were exposed to people that you wouldn't ordinarily be exposed to had you just been very insular about where you worked, if it's an American company or just a European company. So sure. I'd say that's the biggest difference. You stretch and grow in those ways. You develop a different leadership style as a result of being exposed to individuals unlike yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering, in all these different contexts and cultures that you found yourself in, what's been the most challenging transition you've ever made personally in your career?
The transition from corporate executive to entrepreneur.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about the goods and bads of how that went.
Well, I think when you have a huge engine of an organization behind you, you have a structure, you have all the resources available to you. When you become an entrepreneur, a lot of that you don't have right away.
You certainly don't. You can't call the IT guy, can you?
Exactly. So you become, not only are you the business development person, the IT person, the administrative assistant, you wear many hats, and you work incessantly. You work probably harder as an entrepreneur because it's yours. It's your brand. It's your face. It's all about you, and your success is predicated on you. So I would say that was probably the hardest transition, but certainly well worth it because I enjoyed being an entrepreneur.
And this is this business that you set up about 5 years ago called Ceiling Breakers, right?
Yes.
Which is just the most amazing name. I love it. I mean, of course, we can all guess what it alludes to, but it's a beautiful name. Are you able to share with us a couple of examples of how your business has made an impact on your clients or society at large?
I can't do that due to NDAs, but it's very similar so it's a professional services firm. Mm-hmm. A lot of our clients were comprised of the Fortune 500. So we had clients in, financial services, pharmaceuticals, product development, consumer goods, some of the sports leagues. So we had a myriad of clients that came to us with problems that needed to be solved for. And a lot of it had to do with human capital type problems, either organizational development, talent management, diversity, executive coaching. So there were a lot of clients who came to us just for a lot of different, just solving their challenges and solving their problems. And we loved it. We loved it. Instead of working for one major organization, you work for multiple. And we just loved it so much.
Fantastic, fantastic. Certainly getting that perspective that comes from standing back and seeing a range of clients is one that I'm pretty convinced that everybody should see at some point in their career, but not everybody maybe gets there. But that sounds like a wonderful story from your side. Now, going back into the challenges of work in diversity and inclusion these days, tell us what you think can be ways for companies to get beyond the sort of box checking, we're doing diversity PR type thing, and actually make a shift to a properly equitable workplace. Can you tell us some stories or give us some thoughts on this sort of subject and help those who are struggling with this to make better progress?
Well, the journey and the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, whatever you're calling it these days, it has evolved over the years.
Yep.
When I started in this work, it was all about head counting, how many women, how many individuals of ethnic background, and all of those kinds of things. And then it was diversity and inclusion. And then we started talking about culture. And now I really see and feel through unwavering, demonstrated commitment and support and passion for this topic. And I'm not sure if it's just due to what's been happening in society and because we're at an inflection point, particularly here in the United States.
Absolutely.
Some other things, but I've seen and feel, I'm feeling a shift in terms of this work in a good way. And I hope that it continues, that it's just not due to the fact that George Floyd, unfortunately, lost his life by a police officer in Minneapolis. I don't think that that's it. I think that there are some CEOs who are starting to get it and started to understand that it's a true business enabler versus just simply the right thing to do. And I think that the workforce are putting pressure on their leaders to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of the core values of that organization. And I also think that the board of directors for these organizations are also putting pressure on the CEOs and the leadership to make sure that DEI is factored into everything that they do. So it's a new day on this topic. And so what more can they do? I mean, there's a lot more that can be done. I've made a career out of this. And I still think that there's so much more work to be done, that it can take two more lifetimes to figure out the ills of the world and to talk about, gender parity and equity with regards to people of color and LGBTQ and the disabled and marginalization of certain individuals. And so I think that we're going to be talking about this for years to come. We're just scratching the surface. It's really interesting. We, here in the United States, we just buried John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis.
Yeah.
The fortune of meeting him, and I was very much a part of the promotion of the documentary, Good Trouble. He talked about we all need to disrupt and to get into good trouble. And that's essentially what we are doing as diversity practitioners. It's constructive disruption at its best, and not sitting and waiting for something to happen, but making sure that we call things out and say something when things are not right, when they're not fair, when they're not just. So I see a lot more of that happening. So this notion of DEI, it's really evolving in a good way. But I still think that there still needs to be more work done around solutions. There still needs to be an acknowledgement that there are, in fact, disparities that exist in society, but those disparities make their way into our workplaces and spaces, and it impacts our people, and therefore the lived experiences of our workforce it impacts them in a lot of different ways. So we need to name it and not sugarcoat it and call it exactly what it is, if it's bias or racism or discrimination. But more importantly, we need to disrupt some of the harmful patterns that we're now starting to see and do some real deep listening and learning without judgment or defensiveness, and take in the data that we're hearing from our people.
Yeah.
And then get specific about what the actions are going to be. Like, what are you going to do? Because blanket and abstract statements that just denounce some of these terrible things that are happening in some of these workplaces are meaningless. And employees they're attuned to some of the differences between political statements that are being made and real commitments that are being executed. So I think that there's much more that we can do. And then we have to also, I would say to CEOs and other leaders, you have to deal with the uncomfortable and the unpracticed. And what I mean by that is talking specifically about racism. It makes people uncomfortable.
It does.
And so everyone needs to accept their discomfort and push through it, because silence is not an option. And then there's the accountability piece. How are you going to hold yourself as a CEO or senior leader accountable to ensuring that you're creating the right places and spaces where individuals of difference can thrive? So I just think that there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Yes, we've made progress, and I want to acknowledge that progress has been made, but we still have years to go before we see true gender parity, gender equity, and equity across the board in all of diversity's dimensions.
So true. I loved your idea of it's 2 lifetimes work. And I'm thinking, you'd better make sure that you're around for a lot longer and be taking advice from all those different healthcare companies that you've worked for, so that your impact will go on as long as possible. Talking of health, obviously, we've alluded to the events going on in the US and the world around the Black Lives Matter stuff. The other big impact thing that we're having at the moment, of course, is COVID-19 and the impact that's had on the way we work and how organizations organize that. And I'm wondering what you think about how these shifts that have been imposed on us, whether we like them or not, can serve as a catalyst to embed more inclusive practices.
So I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understand the question.
No, I'm thinking about, we had working from home enforced on us by COVID. And I'm wondering how you see that might be used as a catalyst to make more diverse and inclusive practices more commonplace. We've talked at the big picture level of all the, the need to do more and the progress that's been made so far, but just specifically, many companies have been forced into a new paradigm, a new way of doing things in a normal way. What are the opportunities there for us to include more different types of people and styles and so on?
I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. We are now faced with a new normal. Most of us have been working remotely or from home or from some location outside of the workplace since early March, at least here in the United States.
Absolutely.
So we've been forced to do things a little bit differently. It's hard to build a relationship with someone via a Zoom call. There are other ways that you have to build a relationship with a colleague outside of just Zoom, because you don't have that face-to-face interaction. It's really interesting. When we first started working from home, no one wanted to be on camera.
Yeah.
So everyone would just have their beautiful picture up there, and you would hear a voice, and that was it.
Yeah.
So you couldn't get a real sense of, do they understand what I'm saying? What's their reaction to what I'm talking about? So there was no real way to get a feel and a sense for how you're being, how you're being accepted or not. So now most of us are on camera, and it forces you to engage in a different kind of way. So I think this new normal has forced a lot of folks to flex some different kinds of muscles as it pertains to how you interact with, how you engage with, how you lead with others. So it's, I'd say this is true diversity in action in a lot of ways, from cognitive diversity. If you're an introvert,
Exactly.
get used to that camera because it's a new day. It's a new way of operating. And it's going to be like this for some time.
It really is. Yeah. Fantastic insight. Thank you. One final question before we finish up. It's the, what would you do if you had a magic wand question? If you could change one big thing in the world of work, what would it be?
Yeah. I want to be thoughtful about my response to this. What I've learned over the years is that membership into the corporate elite doesn't come easy. It requires more than just keeping your head down and doing a good job. And it requires more than just intellectual horsepower. It requires more, it requires grit, vulnerability, courage, a keen sense of self, mentors, sponsors, and a willingness to consistently perform at a higher standard. And as the old saying goes, sometimes you have to be twice as good and you may get half as far.
Yeah.
And so my wish is that every single individual who enters these places and spaces where we all work will have equal footing in terms of how they are assessed, how they are managed, how they are promoted, how they're developed, that every single individual, regardless of who they are, starts from the same even slate. And so I just think that, if anything, as a woman of color, one of the things that I've learned is, I typically see the good in all things and in all people. And every experience that I've had it's been a roadmap that has allowed me to stretch and grow as a professional and as an individual. Every confusion is insight, every fail is a step in the right direction, and every risk has been a reward for me. And so I want all of us to stay the course, to think about, we are all not a monolith. We all have different lived experiences. And some of those lived experiences shape who we are as individuals. And so factor that into your thought process when you engage with others unlike yourself. Think about what that person may have been through, what the shoes that, the walk that this person has, or the journey that this person has been on during the course of their life. And be fair about the assessment of that individual, because we all show up differently in our lives, shape who we are, and we all show up differently in these places and spaces. So it requires us to be fair in our judgment and in our assessment. So that would be my hope, is that there's an even slate, an even playing field for all of us.
That's a beautiful wish, Michelle, and I certainly join you in it. Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure having you with me here for today. I've loved our conversation. There are so many things I want to ask you offline, but I know that the audience has a love of listening to people like you, but also a certain tolerance for time. So I'm going to make sure that we...
Thank you so much for having me. Please give Antoine my very best. It's been a number of years since I've seen him. And I'm not surprised by his success. And so I wish you all well. And I thank you so much for inviting me to share my experiences with you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Take the very best of care. And we look forward to talking again someday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.